Happy and Healthy, a series to help you learn about available resources.
Welcome to another edition of Happy and Healthy, a series aimed at providing available resources to seniors and older adults and their families and friends in town. I'm Louise Thompson. I'm the Executive Director of Tampa Bay Community Network, and today's show is going to be on being prepared. And we have with us, I think, most of the people that keep us prepared or make sure we're going to be that way. Very fortunate, Ryan Pedigo, who's the Public Health Preparedness Director at Hillsborough County's Health Department. Welcome, Ryan. Glad you could be here. Chief Operations Chief Phil Armiger, the Operations Chief at the Temple Terrace Fire Department, and the Chair of the Hillsborough County Citizens Corps Council. Welcome, Phil. Eugene Henry, the Manager of Hillsborough County's Hazard Mitigation.
Well, that too.
Everyone's need to be medicated while you're trying to figure it out. Hazards, right? Mitigation.
Thank you.
And Holly Wade, who's the Hillsborough County Emergency Management Manager. Welcome to all of you.
Thank you.
First, why don't we go around and talk about what your mission and purpose of your particular agency is, and then we'll start talking about how we can all get better prepared.
Okay. The Hillsborough County Health Department, as well as the Florida Department of Health, is tasked with operating the special needs shelters for the county. We work in conjunction with emergency management, fire rescues, a lot of law enforcement to make that happen, but what that really means is individuals who have a medical condition and they would not be safe in their homes, they need power for survival to operate their equipment, or they need some type of assistance. They can apply to register with one of our shelters, and in the event of a hurricane or other disaster, we would actually house them in those shelters and make sure that they got the care they needed.
Fabulous. Phil?
Well, I'm like you say, Operations Chief at Temple Terrace Fire Department. My day-to-day job is to oversee the firefighters, make sure everything's done in that capacity. They're on day-to-day operations, obviously. As a chairperson for the Citizens Corps Council of Hillsborough County, just oversee the board, and when we handle our different organizations that are part of the Citizens Corps Council, CERT, so forth, Fire Corps, and these other programs we have, and seek funding and volunteers in that capacity that we do there.
And get people trained.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we want to hear all about that.
Sure.
Gene?
The Hillsborough County Hazard Mitigation Program, it integrates or pulls together emergency management into planning, construction, land development, and the other things that we work with are your floodplain management program, ensure the county stays legal, so to speak, with the federal standards, but also works with the Federal Emergency Management Agency to have discounts provided to our residents. We work with all hazards documents to ensure that we stay prepared and meet the requirements at the federal and state levels in order for us to receive funding after a disaster and before a disaster. Right now we're finishing up with a person that had a house that flooded all the time. And through the flood insurance program, we're able to get a grant and rebuild her house so it doesn't flood all the time. So that's an example of the program, and we also work with Federal Alliance for Safe Homes and Institute for Business and Home Safety. So it's pulling together all these programs to sort of make it safer for all of our residents.
Well, that's great. I want to hear more about how flood insurance companies define what a flood is.
Oh, okay.
Holly?
Emergency management, we're actually the agency that's responsible for the preparedness and the response to any type of a disaster, natural or man-made. So our agency is responsible for coordinating all of the folks that you see here, plus a whole lot that you don't, in the event of a hurricane, so that we can serve the citizens, we can conduct those evacuations, we can shelter them as we need to, and keep that in a coordinated effort.
We generally talk about hurricanes because we're used to being under threat of them so much, but it's for other types of emergencies as
Right.
well,
We
right?
plan for any type of an emergency. Basically, we sit around and we think about all the horrible things that can happen. And
What kind of a day is that, Holly?
It makes for a very interesting day.
Okay.
There are some days you really want to leave at 5 o'clock. But we plan for all those types of events with the various agencies to make sure that we have the adequate response to protect our citizens or to advise our citizens on what to do should something happen, like a chemical leak or a flood or any other type of emergency.
Does this make all of you or just some of you involved in things with Homeland Security?
Right. We're part of the Federal Emergency Management Agency, which is under the Department of Homeland Security, so that's all part of what we do too.
Wow. So I want to hear more about how we do all of that. But back to you, Ryan. I'm wondering, how does everybody who needs assistance know about its availability or how you would, how to deal with it? You know, do you get calls constantly because somebody just became alert or some child from out of town said, I think my parents are going to need help in the event of an emergency? How does that work?
We get calls every day throughout the year. And that's, making people aware is one of the biggest challenges I have. We work with a lot of different community agencies, businesses, large and small, neighborhood associations. We give presentations. We partner with emergency management. County has a speakers bureau, which has reps from fire departments, virtually every government agency. And we talk about the special needs program. We're estimating that there's about 187,000
Wow.
people in Hillsborough County that we would consider a vulnerable population. That doesn't mean that they all need a medical shelter. That just means that they have some kind of chronic condition or their language barriers or disability even, that they're living perfectly fine on their own day to day, but in the event of an emergency, if they don't have a plan or someone to help them out, it could be a problem. So the state of Florida has enacted a statute, which actually is one of the few states in the nation that does have a statute that defines and establishes special needs shelters. And our responsibility is to work with everyone at this table plus a whole lot more in making sure that people are aware.
Do we have in Hillsborough County special needs shelters?
The shelters, we have 3 special needs shelters. Most people, what we advise people is if you can avoid it, don't come to the shelter. If we have a hurricane coming, the best thing you can possibly do is leave. Get out of the way of it. But we also know that that's not always possible or practical for some people. And if an individual doesn't have a friend or a relative to shelter with that can help them, then we're kind of the last resort. So the vast majority of the population is going to take one of the first 2 options. They're going to leave. Montana's always nice in August when we have some, but they're going to get out of the path of the storm, and that's the best thing anyone can possibly do.
Do they get an earlier alert or somehow with
Well, no, because you're watching, everybody's getting the same information off the
Okay.
news these days, and the way that we always knock the weather people, but they're very accurate typically on their predictions, and we have so much advance notice, there's no reason for someone to be caught unaware.
What about, we saw so much with Katrina that I have to wonder about the people who couldn't get it. I mean, they absolutely couldn't get to a shelter or get out of the way.
Okay, are you talking about New Orleans or Mississippi?
Okay, I think I'm talking about New Orleans.
New Orleans, that was actually, and Holly could probably talk more about it. I deployed to Mississippi during Katrina, but that was after the storm went through and the levee broke and caused flooding. That was not during the storm.
Okay, so that couldn't have been planned for, actually.
Yes, it could have, and I'll turn it over to Holly on
Holly.
this one.
And it can, and there are plans in place. The problem that, or part of the problem that they experienced in New Orleans with Katrina was the speed in which it occurred. They were not anticipating the breach of the levees,
Right.
So when the levees did give way, there was very little time for people to move and for people to get out of the way. And that's what, when you saw those visions of people on their roofs, that was not really the hurricane, that was the levee breach that happened, and it happened fast, it happened quick, and it happened in areas that weren't necessarily being evacuated due to the hurricane. That's why you saw so much of that going
Phil,
on.
and this is why this core, or this council is so important, is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely.
Will you talk about that and how, what you're doing with the CERT and other?
Right. Well, you know, our Citizens Corps Council, you know, we try to get out into the neighborhoods, try to get volunteers involved, get the neighborhoods involved. And one of the organizations there, of course, that fall under Citizens Corps CERT, which are Community Emergency Response Teams. And that's an organization where the neighborhood groups get together, try to do some basic training that the normal day-to-day you wouldn't do, just to protect yourself, help your neighborhood a little bit if you had to shut a gas line off or, you know, power and things like that. But the biggest part about it is in these neighborhoods that a lot of people don't realize and don't understand is, you know, we encourage people all the time. We say, get a go kit. That's the biggest thing. Get a kit together, prepare yourself, be ready to leave if an emergency happens. And there's times when we may get a storm or something that comes up and, you know, tornado or whatever may hit. You have to be prepared in that circumstance also. So, you know, don't wait until hurricane season's here or when it's getting ready to start working on that now, especially we're talking about with the elderly and everything, because now you're dealing with medications they have to prepare for and all these things. And we want to prepare for about 3 days. So again, putting these kits together and everything, and the importance of that we can, as a fire service and the emergency services, is heed the warnings. You know, get out when we tell you, hey, now's the time to leave. Because if something happens and storm hits, then it's just that more that we have to try to resolve, that more people we have to deal with, those injuries or devastation that may be part of that. And if I can get across a lot of things with this and the fire side of the house, a lot of people don't realize when we encourage you and tell you, listen, you know, you need to leave, like you said, or make these plans now. Plan on it, getting out of the state if that's where the hurricane's coming, and be safe, because what a lot of folks don't realize, as I say, when the winds get a certain level, sustained winds, and not so much with, you know, we'll talk about flooding and everything, but with the sustained winds, we can't respond. That's the biggest thing a lot of people do not realize, and I always try to get across to everybody, when the winds get a sustained, you know, it's about 40 miles an hour or greater, we can't respond.
You can't because it's impossible to
We
get
can't
there,
because,
or it's
absolutely, it's endangering
unsafe
our
for
life.
you
It's
or for
unsafe
you.
for us, and we
Okay.
can't. And unfortunately, people that stay behind and they don't heed these warnings, when the storm is upon you and that emergency is happening right now, that's unfortunate, and we don't want you to be in that situation. It bothers us too, because, man, we want to get out there, we want to help you, but we can't. It's impossible. So from those perspectives, you know, the fire service, that's some of the big stuff. Get the go kits and leave and
Will you
plan
name
this
some of
down.
the things that are in the go kits that people forget, or can we find that list?
Yeah, you can find these lists even when you go on the Hillsborough County's website for Citizens Corps, or actually our
Well, it's volunteer.
volunteer, and we'll give you that website. But when you go in there, they'll kind of explain to you some of the kits. You've got brochures. I have several that we give, and recommendations we have when they have these. Mosey puts on a hurricane conference every year. We have a neighborhood conference coming up here shortly. Go to these things, and there's people here who's going to give you a little more advice. They're going to have pamphlets for you, and put that go kit ready for yourself. And a lot of people don't realize, you know, we forget about these pets.
That's probably one of the biggest reasons people don't leave. Because
Yeah.
what am I going to do with my dog?
And the special needs, and that's what we're saying too, you need to start getting out there now, getting with these, you know, the folks with county and everything, and find out where these shelters are, where is that I can go, that I can take my pet. You know, a lot of folks have, again, the families that, you know, they have children and everything like that. You need to have a special go kit for those, for the kids also, for the children to be able to take with them. There may be something special they want to put in there. Toy, something, you know what I'm saying, that they want to put in there separate then. So each one in the family would have something to take with you. keeping in mind that you want it to be light, you want to have a lightweight, you don't want to carry a bunch of heavy stuff. We're not going to allow you, you're not able to get in some places with a lot of baggage, and it's just for that emergency type of situation. But that's the biggest thing about it, putting these kits together and start doing it now. Now's the time to get yourself prepared.
Ryan, I think you were nodding during pets. Do we have special
Yes.
shelters for people to bring their pets or stay with their pet, and how does that work?
Okay, well, and Holly can talk to the Red Cross shelters that we have set up that do accept pets, but we do have a lot of people in special needs in our registry that say they want to bring their pets, and we do make accommodations for it. We discourage it because our shelter is a big open room,
Right.
and I might have 500 people on the floor there, and some of the folks we have severe respiratory issues, and having a lot of animals and pets around is not really good for them. So we do provide an area that we can safely keep that pet, and
Separate from where the people are.
it's got to be separate from where the people are, unless it's, of course, a service animal.
Right.
And we do have several people who have those, and we do make allowances. We don't segregate them from the rest of the population, but we do keep them in an area that we can keep well ventilated. But if I had 500 people bring a pet, there's no way I could do
And
that.
they have to bring a crate, don't they?
They have to bring a crate
put the
for it.
dog
Yes, ma'am.
in, or
Yes,
a
ma'am.
cat or whatever it is.
And we do have Animal Services does provide service out there, but it's not a thing that we're going to go out and take your dog for a walk. Your dog will be crated for most of the time, or your cat, or what other pet you have. It will be crated most of the time. We do
And you
let them
can't
out.
go out and go to from.
We do allow
wherever
the
you-
residents a couple of times a day to go out and visit with their animal, and if the weather is clear,
Walk
because
them.
we won't let the dog out or the resident out during the storm, we will let
Boy,
them
what
go
a
out.
dilemma! You don't think about all that. That there's things like allergies and concerns
Right.
about just how do you get out with the dog or whatever.
Right. So we do make accommodations because we understand. I mean, I have 4 dogs
Oh dear.
and a cat and kids, but I'll bring my
Any
dogs.
ducks in your yard? No.
No, they're next door.
Yes.
But and I know what it's like, and we're not going to turn anyone away.
The way you're describing it almost suggests that we leave them.
No, my suggestion is to make a plan in advance, as the chief is saying. You've got to have a plan. Don't wait till the last minute.
Yeah. Well,
have to
after
have a
Holly
plan.
just mentioned the fact that the real problem in New Orleans was that was a
Sweep.
sudden
Correct. Well,
contingent, well, something that wasn't thought about. I mean, if you're thinking about the hurricane coming, that's one thing, but to not know that the levee would break.
But, as we're talking about pets and talking about having that plan, for those people that have their pets are their baby, they're their children.
Right.
You need to make sure that you have arranged and planned for that pet the same way you would for a child. It's no different. So if you know that you have to go to a shelter, is there a friend or a family member that can take your pet? For example, my house, obviously I'm not there when a storm's going on. So I have family members that come stay at my house, plus I have pets that come from some of my coworkers, and my house literally becomes a pet shelter for the people I work with.
Oh, you can't be there because you're out
Because
trying to help
I'm
the
I'm
whole
working.
situation, right?
So what we encourage folks to do is if you know you've got to go to a shelter, number one, try to see if there's somewhere else that your pet can go and be cared for, because the pet isn't going to be happy at the shelter. The pet isn't going to be with you. It's going to be in a crate. It's going to be in a separate area, and it's going to be stressful for them.
Yeah,
So-
that sounds totally inconvenient all the way around.
it is
because
very difficult.
Even though it's nice of you to have done all that, I know I have a small dog, and you know how they spaz with other big dogs around them. I mean, they're just crazy.
Exactly.
That would. I'd probably have to find a pet psychiatrist after that or something. Like, you know how that goes. It's just really very difficult.
But a shelter is really a last resort, and that's how people need to look at it, and not their first choice. You only should go to a shelter if you absolutely need to. If you cannot shelter with friends or family, you cannot leave the area, and your house is not safe, or you do not feel your house is safe, if you live in a mobile home park, by all means, that's what these shelters are for, but they're a last resort. They're not, as one of Holly's old bosses used to say, it's a lifeboat, not a cruise ship. And I don't mean to be hard on that, but people need to understand shelters are not
Oh,
fun
I
places
asked
to
her
be.
old boss, what do we do if we don't want to leave? And he said, just order a body bag or something like that.
I wouldn't tell you to do
As
that.
I remember, I think he did say that on television. It was sort of frightening. Gene, jump in here with some of these mitigation things in terms of flooding, because
Well, it's not
you're
just,
involved in more with what happens with flooding and so forth.
well, and the risk, and what we're talking about right now is a hurricane or tropical storm and flooding that goes with it, as well as wind. But we have all types of hazards during the year that we need to have our population prepared for. So when the chief says be prepared, it's not just be prepared for the hurricane season or the rainy season. Remember, we have freezes, we have droughts, so there's all types of situations that you need to be prepared for. So having a package of goods and lightweight that you can just put in your car or a friend's car, or get on a bus and go to either a shelter or and again, not even if it's a shelter of as we call the last resort, but even our friends, be prepared for all the risk that confront us here in Tampa Bay. It's, as we always say, it's paradise, but we have a lot of things that confront us. And so when you're talking about flood, though, we have multiple levels of flooding. There's the rainfall events, and then you have, and if you, like you were saying earlier, if you live along a river, the river can come up. You may not know that the river is going to, breach its banks.
I can't even understand that. Could you all explain how the river could be? It's got to be 100 yards from my back door. How it could be higher than...
We have two ways
I just don't even understand that.
You have two different things. You have you have something called storm surge, where you have a big storm out there in the Gulf, and there's a lot that goes into it. There's pressure and the speed and everything else. But what it does, it puts a lot of water into the bay, so it acts like a dam. So you always have water coming down the river. So what happens is that other water that's in the base, makes it pile up behind it, so it can actually overtop its bank. Just from a natural flow of things and not having anywhere else to go. The other way is if it's raining in Polk County or Pasco, our rivers collect that water as well. So if we get so much rain in a certain amount of time, and we have looked at the models, we have great folks, some of the top in the country that work in our stormwater section, and they can run these models. So we know where these rivers are going to overtop. Some of them will go over the roads, some of them will flood structures and homes. We can tell you where all of that's going to be. Based on a particular type of storm. So if you have rainfall that's happening in Polk County and Hillsborough County, let's take the Alafai River for instance, then we know the level that it's going to go to. It may take 16 hours or 18 hours to get to its peak, but a few years ago in 2004, for instance, the Alafai River went to an elevation that it didn't reach for over 30 years. So, and you're talking about homes were flooded, elevated homes even. So we can look at that, and we can look at the inland rainfall events. Then we have some of the areas that aren't connected to a river. They do a lot of ponding. It starts to pool around the house, and then before it breaks over the road, it's going to flood the house possibly, and then it'll hit the road and the drainage system and keep on going. Now, the county really and the cities look at how to look at that, drainage systems. And the new ones are usually prepared to look at that, but we have a lot of older subdivisions too. So we have something that's called the flood insurance rate map, and that's available on our website. And you can look and say, okay, am I at risk to the inland flooding? Riverine flooding is what we call it when it goes down the river, inland when it's not with the coastal. And then we have the other part of the website, and we try to keep the two separate. One's called storm surge, and that's when the storm puts a lot of water into the bay. You were talking about Mississippi and New Orleans. There were two different events there. One was a storm surge, and the peers here that went out, you literally saw pianos and trees, and that's how high the water got inland.
It's just amazing to me. It's just something like you go, that can't really be real.
Well, and if you drive around the county, we have placed signs in certain areas, and as far in as 3 to 5 miles, that the bottom of the sign is no less than 13 feet off the ground. So if there's a huge, and Holly says and gets on with the Office of Emergency Management says, listen, we're expecting a storm surge event at a certain level, then those signs identify a major storm surge event, not a Category 1 storms, what we call a Category 1 or a 2 evacuation level, but a 3 or above. And sometimes, just like in Texas, it's not always exact. So the EOC is going to be telling you that this is the best of the available data, and this is what we're anticipating. But if you're in those areas of those signs, and it's a major hurricane with storm surge, we can guarantee that there's going to be at least that, somewhere around that level of water that will come into those neighborhoods.
There could be 13 feet more of water, is that what you're saying?
Yes, where those signs are for a major...
twice your height, for example, or something.
Going over into the house. So, and we have those spotted throughout the county, so people can make a reference. So if they see Holly or the other folks at the Office of Emergency Management on the television saying that we have a major storm surge event, that's when you either think about going to a friend or another family member or a shelter to evacuate if you're in those evacuation zones.
So you go to higher grounds.
The saying is run from the wind, hide, or run from the water, hide from the wind. I almost said it backwards, and I hide from them both. But.
You wanted to jump in.
And what he's bringing up is correct. When you're talking about those rivers rising and whatnot, it can happen at any time. If you think back to last March, the Emergency Operations Center had to activate because we had freak storms with tornadoes come through and hit down in South County. My house was without power for 3.5 days. I was caught up in that. Unfortunately, I was the only house in my area, but...
Now, what happens in that you talked earlier about people with special needs and you didn't have power for 3 or 4 days? What happens to those folks if there's no power in
They
their house
actually
and
register with
they have an
TCO.
oxygen requirement or electrical something?
Well, two things on that. They can register with TCO as a special needs prioritization, and they will come out and get power as quickly as possible. The second issue is that Florida passed a law in 2005 which requires the medical equipment companies to maintain the same level of service before, during, or after an event like a storm. So if someone uses an oxygen concentrator, for example, and the power goes out and it's going to be out for a while, their medical equipment provider will come out and deliver them enough oxygen to last and to continue resupplying it with portable tanks that don't require oxygen.
So they are required to do that?
Yes, ma'am.
Well,
that is a Florida law as of 2005.
Wow.
And all of their emergency plans are submitted. They are reviewed by the health department. We have a regional review here. We look at all of them for an 8-county area because most of them provide services in multiple counties, and we want the same standards.
When you talked earlier, Phil, about the Citizens Core Council.
Yes, ma'am.
And when I combine that with what Holly and the rest of you are saying, and I think about New Orleans, one realizes that nobody could get anywhere. I mean, the emergency first responders could not get to the people. So, and this is where this group comes in, is it not? Where you...
Yeah, they help in that, but in the bigger picture of it is the fortunate thing in Hillsborough County, we're prepared. You know, they train quite a bit. Their emergency operations centers, they really are focused, and they're prepared. They train, but it's you can prepare for any kind of an incident, but there's always going to be that element where, again, people don't heed the warning. You know, how many times we told you, hey, you know, evacuate, and say, you know, last time I did that, man, nothing happened, I had to come back. But you know what? You were able to come back. That's the good thing. So still heed these warnings and everything, but again, where we get involved with these other organizations where you're probably talking about CERT and some of these folks, these are opportunities for people to volunteer. And what we're going to train you, what they teach in a CERT class, for instance, to get on that real quick, is really the bottom line is take care of yourself. That's the bottom line. Protect yourself. Make sure your family is safe. Then outside into, let's say for instance, your block or your neighborhood down the street, where we can start taking care of our neighbors. Who are these people who did not leave? Who needs help? Where can I go? What is the damage assessment in my immediate area? And then from there, some CERT branches, they'll branch out a little bit, but we try to keep it in the neighborhoods. That's what we want it to be, in your community. Take care of your community. We give you some specialized training. It's all volunteer. That's what it all boils down to. We also have it in with the volunteer and police service, when we talked about that you can volunteer for that, which is basically patrolling your neighborhoods and on the law enforcement side of the house. But on the fire side or the emergency part of it, we want you to be prepared to leave and evacuate when we tell you to. But if unfortunately you're not able to, we're going to give you some training, help yourself, and maybe help your neighbor. And that's some of the training and recommendation when we talked earlier about getting a kit together and some of these things. Have that stuff prepared, ready to go. And again, if you can't leave for some reason, again, like I say, the groups that get together, they meet, they'll all meet each other. Hey, this is the point where we're going to all meet after the event. So we can say, is any damage to any of your stuff? No, everything was good. Now we can branch out a little bit. Let's check the neighbor down the street, the elderly lady who we know she's not leaving. If you have an event in there, now you're going to report that to law enforcement, fire service. Because now we're going to be able to come in with special equipment, training that you're not going to have on the medical side of the house, fire side of the house, that we're able to get in that neighborhood that now you've identified for us, which allows us to go specific areas as opposed to, canvassing an entire area. When we get these CERT members, they can report that to us, and it does help out quite a bit.
Thanks so much, Phil. We're going to take a short break right now. Be back in just a few minutes. Please stay tuned. Thank you.
Boldly go to socialsecurity.gov. Help yourself or someone you love.
It's eminently logical.
Hey, how's it going?
Sir, are you okay?
What? Oh, this? It's probably nothing. I'm sure it'll go away.
Go away? But, sir, that can't be good.
No, it's cool, really.
Do you want a napkin or something?
Everything's fine. Thanks.
You wouldn't ignore this, so why ignore the signs of a stroke? At the first warning signs, call 911 immediately, because time lost is brain lost.
All my friends used to say, the first time you go to the beach, get a good burn. You'll tan faster. So, at the end of 3 or 4 days, we'd be peeling and, skin falling off. Tan was considered healthy. None of us knew the potential ramifications of overexposure to the sun. About 3 years ago, I noticed a red spot at the end of my nose. Whether you see a doctor look you in the eye and say, that you have a malignancy on your face, that's a little frightening. In fact, it's very frightening, especially when you see, a piece of you being carved away in little slivers. Skin cancer, that wouldn't happen to me. I mean, it never occurred to me. Life is very precious to me now. Almost losing it makes that very, very clear.
Welcome back to Happy and Healthy. Today we're talking about being prepared, and we have folks here who can really keep us prepared, get us prepared. Phil has taken out, while we took our break, the graduation present that you get when you've gone through CERT training. Is that right?
Absolutely, yes, ma'am. This is just some of the equipment that is provided for you, and again, it's a volunteer. It's a course that's about approximately 3 days long. It's given over either some evening classes, some weekend classes, usually 3 Saturdays. That's what we do in Temple Terrace. But after that, when you graduate, you're given a kit that's provided for you at no cost to you. And of course, you have a hard hat to protect your head, obviously, and gloves that you'll have. And there's other different items that we have there. One of the main things that's involved in there is also you're given a vest, which just say CERT, Community Emergency Response Team, is a vest. And any of the CERT team members that are out there, once they graduate and they're part of these teams, this is what they're going to be in. This is how we identify them. This is how their teams are identified. Some of them build from that. Again, this is just the basic, like I say, it was just a bag that's provided for you. You can have some medical things, some different items in there. And it's more than just getting in the street and being prepared or working these disasters. We're also trained in triage. So if there's a large event where we have to go in there and help law enforcement, fire department, because we get stretched out so far. There's more patients than we can handle. Certain team members come in and they help out a little bit in the basics, identifying some of these
Somebody's
injuries.
really hurt.
Yeah, some of these things. Try to identify them. That way we can get emergency help to them a little bit quicker. We identify them as being emergent right now. These people can wait and so forth. But again, with the CERT team, which falls under our Citizen Corps Council, you volunteer for it. And again, you set your teams up, and we like to have different neighborhoods, and they stay in their neighborhoods, try to get that going first, and then outside of the neighborhoods if needed. But again, it's a real good program. Again, we're always going to train you in the very basics, protect yourself. And you'll hear that anytime we talk about that or any emergency management, take care of yourself, your family, then your neighborhoods and so forth. So.
And Holly, you were comparing this to what used to be called civil defense.
Right. A lot of our older folks do remember civil defense, and the whole premise of civil defense and block leaders was to be able to take care of you and your family, then take care of your neighbors, and then take care of your neighborhood. And that's all this is. It's an update to that program. That program was designed really for the Cold War. It was designed for the atomic threat. And as emergency management and fire rescue and all evolved, we realized that those same basic tenets that we were talking about just in the Cold War era really applied across a whole range of disasters and emergencies. So what they did is they took from just worrying about civil defense to the community emergency response team to encompass all of those types of hazards and to give folks that additional level of training to be able to help their families and their friends.
It just makes me wonder why when I was growing up, we had these, I don't know whether they were weekly or the fire drills, or we had to go under the desk, or we had to run outside or do things like that. Is there anybody that does anything like that with an entire community? Like, hey, let's have a drill in case this ever happened. Did you ever think of that, or would that be too crazy?
We do, and that's done with the schools. Obviously, the schools, they're required to have their tornado drills and their fire drills, and we just had Hazardous Weather Awareness Week, so all of the schools were practicing that. Along with that, we had a lot of our homes for the aged, and some of the nursing homes were participating along with that. We also do an annual mass casualty drill in which we take about 700 high school students, flood the hospital emergency rooms to do those types of practice in those drills.
Oh, okay.
We just had a drill down with one of our CERT groups, had a big community exercise with that in Riverview.
Mm-hmm. And the fire department does that too anyway, does have these kinds of things.
Well, the fire department, although with certain teams in the neighborhoods, fire departments help them, encourage them. We'll give you some specialized training on the medical side of the house, bandaging and things like that. We work with the CERT teams, especially in Temple Terrace. We work real well with our CERT teams. Hillsborough County does, Tampa. They also have a large CERT team. And we're not talking about a few people. There's quite a few folks involved there. And again, it's a dedication. Hey, I want to volunteer to do something. And this is a national. This is not just local to Hillsborough County or Florida or whatever. This is national. That the president put out years ago about volunteering, and this is just one of the parts you can do. And I'd like to add to with the CERT team, now there's people who may look at say, well, you know, man, I would love to volunteer, I'd love to do that, but you know, really, I don't have the capacity. You know, I can't lift heavy stuff, I can't do these things. The good thing about CERT is that it's good for everybody. Everybody can possibly have a place within that team. We may have some elderly folks that are very good that retired, and they may be business oriented. And they can help you keep your organization organized. There's people that maybe have some disabilities. We utilize one with our team. She's our radio operator. So there's places usually for pretty much anybody in that service. I mean, there's something that you can give to your team. And the more you have, the more people that's involved with it, that's unique, and the better team you actually have. And you find that they really work good together because they're rounded, they're well-rounded throughout. And that's what's the good part of with the CERT team. People want to be part of an organization that helps. And this is one of the ones that.
How often are the classes held, or are they all around the county, or just?
Yeah, they're scheduled usually every couple of months. If you go on the website that we have with our Volunteer Hillsborough, you'll see there'll be prompts to calendars of events, and you'll see different teams that are going to put on a class, and they usually about every couple of months. There's a class that goes on that.
It sure sounds to me like even if you weren't going to be in a position to volunteer, at least you learn how to take care of yourself.
Yeah,
and your own family. Is that right? I mean,
you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right.
Because we all rely on so many things we don't even realize anymore. And one of my sons got married in Alabama right after that huge storm. We had an Ivan, was it? We had something here in Hillsborough County a couple of days later. They had one up there a week before, and I remember we had to go off. 10 was closed for miles, so we had to drive very far out there. The most incredible thing to me was the number of trees that had come down and the number of houses which their roofs had blue tarp on them. And then I guess people came by and piled these enormous trees so that some other equipment would come across to, probably chop up those trees and mulch them or whatever it is they do with them. But what really got me is that, to me, looks so completely dangerous when you saw that houses, and we have a lot of older and big trees, and people don't necessarily take care of all those. Once I saw those, though, I took care of all my trees, for sure.
Yes, sir.
But that is a situation, too, that is off the page with maybe it happens in a hurricane and maybe not. I mean, and they're trained to help with that or get the tree out of there, or if somebody got hurt or...
And again, in this program, as it pertains to CERT, the biggest thing we want to teach people and train people is you're still a civilian. But what you're a civilian with a little more knowledge than the next civilian. You know what I mean?
Right, right.
We're going to teach you to identify these hazards so you don't get in that predicament. Like you're talking about with the big trees, things that are down. Well, there's some things that, homeowner may try to tackle. And we're going to be enough to say, listen, that's something you don't want to, you don't want to do. You don't really want to put yourself in that predicament. You talked earlier about the tarps and putting these blue tarps up. There's a lot of houses, again, that, sometimes when a storm or whatever it is, whether it be a tornado, anything, floods, hurricanes that come through, well, you don't have enough people in the skill set. Again, you got to realize some of the elderly folks and so forth, they can't get up on that roof to put these tarps on. A lot of them have to wait. Well, a lot of times this rain is still going to continue. Well, CERT team members, part of the training with CERT as they advance through there is being able to put tarps on roofs and so forth. So they can help you out, and it's a great organization. It gives you opportunities to help.
And there's other organizations that work along with CERT. For instance, there's community organizations assisting in disasters. We all call it COAD for short. And that's a group of organizations. Some of them have received, or many of them have received CERT training. So they go assist other volunteer groups after a disaster, and that's where they come together and they have the skills to assist in putting blue roofs on, or going through the neighborhoods and ensuring, there's someone that may need water or something of that sort. So there are those other organizations that are volunteer, in which our community can volunteer. You can come through the Citizen Corps Council. The chair of the local COAD, communities organizations assisting in disasters, is part of the Citizen Corps Council as well. So if our residents and our neighbors out there want to volunteer and participate, they can go through either hillsborocounty.org, neighborhood relations, or the Citizen Corps Council has their own website. It's through Hillsborough County, but it's Volunteer Hillsborough County. And they can go either place and find out where they can volunteer and build their skills to assist. First, again, like Phil was saying, it's neighbor, helping yourself, neighbor to neighbor, and then your community, your immediate community.
When you were talking about flooding and putting signage up and doing all this, I'm wondering, there were a lot of departments that are involved with all of this in terms of, we've had, okay, now we're not having the building boom that we'd experienced for years and years, but is there advice being given about don't let this area be developed? Because, if water doesn't go someplace,
well,
if we pave everything over.
Well, and that does exacerbate some of the flooding conditions, but what's neat is our community is somewhat of a leader of the rest of many others. And it's not that you can't build, but you got to be smart about your building. For instance, we have modified the construction code, and not, again, there's the Florida building code, but we put higher standards there. So let's just say you're going to build in an area where we know that that subdivision's really low along the Alafai River, and during a peak period of flooding, it's going to have 16 feet of water in there. Well, we ensure that those homes and the people that are building those homes are smart, and they're giving the information, and then every year we go back out and we let folks know that you're living in this high-risk area, because we have a lot of people that come in and then some people move away. So we remind them every year, and not only through the neighborhood conference, but mail-outs and brochures, and then they have areas that they can call in and talk about it. But so that's one way. But when folks step in, one of the things that they have to do is say, okay, how am I going to take care of this lot? So a contractor says, okay, I'm in this high-risk area for flooding. I'm going to have to do certain things. They have to build to a certain standard. Then they're going to say, well, I'm going to actually build this house in this high-risk area, what we call high risk, either to wind, could be to a wildfire interface, so there's fire and there's sinkholes. We have areas of high muck soil, so there's all these risks. So we have this identified, so they look at the land first, and then they look at the house and say, okay, what kind of house can I build and what kind of foundation is the best? And that's where, yes, and it's, as you mentioned, many agencies are involved. So, and those many agencies look at the different parts of it. And when it gets into final construction, for instance, you have plans examiners and inspectors that have been trained to know what that building needs to do. From for instance, an architect that designed it to say, okay, I'm going to put you right there next to the Alafai River or the Hillsborough, the Little Manatee, the many rivers that we have. By the way, we know that the soils may be mucky, so you're going to have to tell us the type of soil so you can have a pile foundation or something of that sort. So yes, to answer your question, and a lot of agencies are involved. It takes a lot to go through, and it may be a subdivision, it could be an individual's house, and there's a way to look at it and build it.
I understand, I'm being on the Hillsborough River myself, that this used to be in a different floodplain zone than it became after a dam was built, right? So that would mitigate it. I mean, there are things that go on to mitigate. And I do notice before anybody expects a big rain that the river's lower. Like somebody's messing with, is that right? Or
no, you had back
things?
Early on, and Temple Terrace is actually a very positive recipient of what we call the bypass canal. So there were changes to the Hillsborough River, and they modified what we call the flood. Most people understand as the floodplain, and it did reduce risk because now we can pull a plug and let the water rush one way and not necessarily flood the others. But there are other risks to that. Now you have a dam and you have a spillway. So our friends, such as Holly over at the Emergency Management Office, need to be able to contact people if something should happen to the dam or the spillway and things don't work correctly. So they may have been, some areas may have been removed of what they call a floodplain, but it still has a risk, and that's where the Emergency Management Office is prepared to say, okay, if something isn't working right with that dam or that spillway, then we know these people. We have all these addresses, and we can reach those very quickly if something's not working correctly. So yes, you can remove, and again, the Hillsborough River is a perfect example, and they've done that in different areas of the country too, where you can relieve some of the the threat of flooding, but you still have to be, someone has to be aware of what's going on, so if something doesn't work right, they can let folks know.
You want to speak to that, Molly?
And the other thing to remember too, as technology changes and evolves, we have better models, computer models that help us decide, okay, how high is this? How high can the water go? We have better elevation data, so that we can measure down to within 6 inches of what the ground elevation is in a certain area. So as technology evolves and changes, our maps are going to evolve and change and become better, so that we can really zone in on what those hazards are and make a more accurate prediction for folks versus what we did 50 years ago. So with the change in technology and the change in the maps, that's going to change some of those areas, so that we can predict the hazards a little more accurately.
And so recently there were a whole new series of maps put out for flooding, evacuation, different maps for different things, and they're all available on your website. We're going to probably put some of them into this program.
Yes, hillsborocounty.org.
Okay. And so I don't kind of understand this, but I think what it's now called, where I am, the Hillsborough River, is called 100-year flood zone, or 100-year.
Yeah, and
I don't
what,
like 10 years. What does that mean?
I don't like using that
I got to
term.
wait 100 years. It's really it's your likelihood of it flooding, correct?
A 1% probability of it occurring. Now, that's sort of a misnomer too, because if you live within that boundary of what we call a high risk, or the floodplain, or what I like to refer to as a 1% probability, our modelers from our stormwater sections look at all the elevations, just as what Holly was saying. And so it's, if you're living in that area, you really have, over the life expectancy of that house, a 26% chance of water, if it's below that base flood elevation, or that elevation that's given for that flood elevation that's within that zone, you have a 26% chance of flooding. So even though there's a...
Gee, that seems pretty high.
It is very high, and that's why the county is, they say they help produce these maps with FEMA, the flood what we call the flood insurance rate maps, but they mean much more to us than the Federal Emergency Management Agency for the insurance side. They mean, what they mean for Hillsborough County and our residents is, if you're in that area, you have a high risk of flooding during a rainstorm, or if it's a coastal area, during a storm surge event. So they are very important to us, and there is a high risk there, and that's why we always say, listen, if you're told to evacuate and it's in a flood area, really evacuate. There's a high chance that you could become very wet or worse.
Or could you run across the street where you're not, like I said earlier, across the street's not in the A zone, I know that. I know I could go over there.
And this is what I always tell people.
Please don't go across the street. Please get the hell out of Dodge. I know.
These flood elevations are based on a model, and usually it's a clear day before and a clear day after, and there's nothing blocking up where the water's going to flow. So if you have Mother Nature that just wants to be a little ornery, and she throws some stuff in a creek and blocks it up, or she wants to throw a little bit more than what that model's anticipating for a rainfall event that's going to flood you, then you're going to flood and get wet. So running across the street to your neighbor that's outside of that flood zone probably wouldn't help too much. It may help a little bit. What you really want to do is look for something a little bit higher.
And I better take the inflatable boat out of the pool and take that with me too. We only have a couple of minutes left, and I just want to give you each a minute to convey something you think it's important for the viewer to know that we didn't cover, or that you want to emphasize. So I'll start with you, Ryan.
Well, what I would like people to do is, even if they do have an evacuation plan, they're going to leave the area. Even if they do have a relative or a friend they're going to go stay with, please register for the special needs shelter. You never know when something's going to happen. It is a last resort, but it's nice to have when you need that last resort. And also, I would advise people, make sure you have your medications, enough to last for a couple of weeks, up to 30 days. And make sure you have a copy of your medical record if you have chronic conditions. Every time you go to the doctor, they give you copies. If you don't have one now, ask the doctor to make a copy of your record, because if something were to happen, and I've seen so many people in Katrina, in New Orleans, in Biloxi, where I was, their doctor's offices weren't there. And these were people with chronic conditions. My sister was one of them, and she didn't listen to me, and I do this for a living.
Okay.
Get it.
Bill.
Yeah, just in line with that, we covered a lot of things today, and as you can see, disaster is, it's big. I mean, it's a lot to do, and we haven't touched on fires and things like that at all. A thing I can suggest to people to do is really go to these events that they're having out there. Again, coming up, they're going to be like a neighborhood conference that comes there. These experts, these people, us that are in the room here, we're going to be there. We're going to be able to talk to you a little more one-on-one, explain some of these things you may still be a little confused about, give you more direction, some handouts, some directions, what to do about a kit. What do I need to really put in that kit?
Right.
We talk about the one that's coming up again, fire safety. So there's a whole lot more involved with that, but go to those things when they're in the neighborhood for sure.
Gene?
Well, and as a mitigation person, be prepared. And if it's volunteering for a group or just having your package ready or knowing that it floods or there could be a possible fire around your house, be prepared, and know what you have to do in the event that there is a fire or a flood or a wind event.
Holly?
And to kind of piggyback on what everyone has said is really know what your hazards are. Know what those risks are. Make a plan. How are you going to deal with that? Where are you going to go? What are you going to do? And put that kit together and share your plan. That's the other piece. If you've got a daughter in Nebraska and she sees on the Weather Channel that there's something going on here, she's going to fear for you. And if she doesn't know where you're going to go or what you're going to do, odds are she's going to be calling me saying, "Where's my mom?" I don't know where your mom is. So no matter what you do,
this ice thing in case of emergency, or let somebody know where.
Share your plan. If you've registered for a special needs shelter, let your family members know or let friends know that you've done that, so that they don't worry about you, that they know that that's what you've done and that's where you're going.
Because the phones are going to start going crazy off the hook.
Exactly.
A few months ago, there was an unusual happening in D.C. area, and I have a son there. And it was, I'm driving along and listening to them say, the radio guy's actually talking from D.C., and he says, "Oh my God, I think we're having an earthquake." So and his co-host says, "Didn't you just move the table?" And they're like, "Are we on the air? We don't even know," whatever. So what do you think? First thing I want to do, I get on the phone, I check with my son, cannot get through. So I called one of the other boys, and he said, "I just texted him, not to worry." That went through. Texting goes through, and cell phones didn't.
Sometimes.
They were all down.
Sometimes.
I found that really unusual, but there was no plan for anything like that. Who would you call? What would you do? So you're right. Somebody needed to call and say, "Mom, I'm okay," and I could have spread that word pretty well. Thank you so much for bringing everybody's attention to these different dilemmas that we face as we just face life and what goes on around us. And I appreciate all that all of you do to try to keep us safe and smart and all of that. And thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.